couple of them are ministers and such as Bishop Joseph Cheshire, and then you have some. Ironically, you also have one person who was up there who was part of the Ku Klux Klan, which is a weird dynamic and a weird mix. But the overall, I tell everybody to go to Google and Google Bishop Joseph Cheshire and the starting of St. Augustine's University, and how he puts in there that at that point in time after the Civil War, that the slaves needed a place to themselves where they can govern themselves and basically maintain themselves and build themselves up to a point where they can also be incorporated into the environment. And he didn't sit back and say, okay, y'all need to integrate and just be part of the overall race at that time. He knew that at that time. He said even in his writings that the slaves were so scarred, and put in today's framework, mentally they were so dysfunctional because what happened, they had been downtrodden and enslaved for so long that they had to figure out how to govern themselves and be about themselves and rebuild themselves. So you have the church, the Episcopal Church, especially here in North Carolina, that was saying, okay, we'll have St. Augustine University to be the normal school to help those that were enslaved, and had them start doing some of the things they were doing while they were enslaved, such as carpentry, masonry, also growing agricultural products, which were right there in the heart of Raleigh, where St. Augustine University is. If you go back and excavate some of the land, you probably see old plowshares there and old wheels there from back in the time. So churches have always been actively involved in building the HBCUs, which is ironic. Like you got Livingstone College, you have Johnson C. Smith, you have all these different colleges that were started by different denominations of churches because they knew that was the only way. And if you look at the original schoolhouse, the original way of learning, it was in the churches that eventually you had everybody come together and start learning how to read. It was written in a book that after the Civil War, that was one of the interesting classrooms of our society where you had little children and you had people in their 60s, 70s, and grandparents all sitting in the same room learning how to read and write the ABCs for the first time. So we've come a long way. We got a long way to go, but guess what? We got an infrastructure now that ain't no stopping us now. And so with the church, with us being the wind beneath our wings and them coming back to the fold, we can make it.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody want to share any thoughts on how the Black church is going to help us fight injustice in our communities?
Well, first, I chime in because you started out with Absalom Jones and Richard Allen in the Free African Society that they started in 1787. Like I think one of the most important things for us to take out of this, which is over 200 years ago, is that they considered themselves as African, right? They knew their heritage and they knew that we were from Africa. Both of them had bought their freedom from slavery, and then they both ended up getting married and they bought their wife's freedom. But even though they had freedom, they still fought for the freedom of all black people, not only in the United States, but globally. And I think that, this is really important that not only, did they start the Free African Society, but also the AME churches, the African Methodist Episcopal churches. And within the teachings was liberation, right? And so when we bring it up to speed, and it really isn't a lot to add because Dr. Sauls did such a wonderful job in expressing, the church's role and even connecting them to the HBCUs, right? Which I think is important. But I think what I get from Absalom Jones and Richard Allen was the courage and the spirit to fight for justice and to fight for the liberation of all black people. And I think that the role, because I really believe in solutions, right? And I think that, the church can still play an important role in organizing, because as we continue through these discussions, we're going to understand the value and importance of us organizing, right? But now the churches, they have been taken out of the organizing for justice, for all people and for humanity. And like we spoke on last week, it's more about prosperity, preaching for prosperity, preaching about buying jets and, you can accomplish this if you give the pastor so much money as far as in paying your tithes. So I think if we get back to the origins of what the church was built for, and that was the fight for justice and liberation, while also at the same time, receiving spiritual instructions to strengthen our mind and to strengthen our spirit, which is so important, right? So it was also a theology that was based on, liberation and freedom. And I think that that's one of the things that we can, build bridges, and that's really what I hope come out of, these type of discussions where we can get with the churches here locally, and start building bridges so that we can start to go in our communities and make sure that we really start to strengthen our communities by having quality, programs and workshops and, just things that we can do that's going to empower, the whole community from a mental perspective, psychological, spiritual, and even economics, right? So it's so many things that the church can do and can play a role in making sure that we're able to build our communities up.
And as I was researching the Free African Society, what I liked that they provided social and economic guidance and and medical care. They also became the model for banks in the African community also. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yes, indeed. Well, and that was 1787.
Right.
So it's 200 and something years later. We can do the same thing, and we can do better if we all put our minds together.
Yes, please.
When we talk about the African church, we have to remember when it was instituted here on the grounds of what we call America. Initially, the former slave owners gave religion as a form of control, management, and dominance. And they had no intentions of using any kind of religion to free us. So when they introduced Christianity, they used it as a dictatorship because only the pastors could use the Bible to read. No one else was allowed to read except the pastors. This is also the story of Nat Turner, who was a preacher, who was given which scriptures he would take back to the plantation and tell your lower slaves to obey your master, for this is right. They would use particular language and scriptures to keep the slaves under control. But that thirst for reading and writing just didn't stay there.
Right.
And so what the slaves knew is that whatever was in that book had to be more than what was just given to them. Whatever was in that book also was a liberator. And everybody wanted, if anybody was going to read anything, it was going to be what was in this Bible. And so the church became a conduit for African Americans to hold this institution of slavery accountable. Because Harriet Tubman was Moses to her people.
That's right.
Where did she get the word Moses from?
From out of the Bible.
Come on.
Yeah.
And Moses was a man name, but she knew it was the spirit of Moses,
That's right.
more so than a gender issue or a gender matter. So here we are taking these prolific figures before we can understand what was said. We were taking stories out of that Bible given to us as a promise. Heaven. We go from believing that heaven was over yonder to thinking now we can have heaven right here on earth.
Right.
And then you start seeing these revolts. So church is just not a building or AME or any of those things. For us, it is spirituality at its best. It is the righteousness that subservience the law of which these who hold them in bondage. And they were always fearful of preachers who would come up and start declaring something else. And that's where Nat Turner and the system sort of switched arms, because you start seeing even John Brown. He starts declaring scripture. Many of these people use a higher form of law and morality that came straight out the Bible before we had too big of an institution, and we have to go back. The church has to go back. Can they play a role? Yes, but if what they are teaching does not hold systems of corruption accountable, then we have become subservient to the very systems that we say we're trying to liberate ourselves from. And that is what we have to focus on when we're talking about the modern day church.
Right. Modern day, and you sound like you was back in when they was first teaching, and this part of the miseducation part also, they giving the scriptures, and the language and the scriptures, the way they gave it to us was for used for oppression also, to keep us oppressed. So they gave it to us in their own language.
I think the seriousness of the church was downplayed once we became galvanized looking at TV. When you started looking at Flip Wilson when he came out as a preacher, mocking the church. And then when Richard Pryor had his show for a while, he came out, making mockery of the church, and it was, and then when you look at that, I think it was Car Wash where he pulls up with the Pointer Sisters,
Right.
and then you say nothing from nothing, leave nothing. You gotta have something. So they had to stop singing this song. If you gotta believe in someone, why not believe in me? And it's ironic how music interplays with us all the time.
Yes.
And even when it comes to the church, even the music in the church, all of a sudden, it's like we had songs like Up Above My Head. I hear music in the air, which were like, signals. Hey, watch, when the moon comes out, we're gonna follow the moon, and we're also gonna, follow, different trails, and we call it code switch, and we also had hidden, symbols that we followed.
Yes.
Because when they used to sing that song about, the gates to the city, the 12 gates to the city and things of that nature, this basically was a way of saying, hey, look, when we leave, this is the way you go. And that's the only way we can do it. We couldn't sit there and stand around and communicate because it wouldn't let you ever gather.
That's
But
right.
while you're out there hoeing in the field, chopping cotton or picking cotton or cutting corn, y'all are singing. So the music in itself was liberating and also uplifting. At the same time, was telling us it's only a matter of time. Where now the music, started transitioning in the church.
Come
To
on.
all of a sudden, the music got to a point where, let's just get up there and just have a praise team. But when you found out when you had a choir, everybody became involved. Everybody understood that, they became second nature. That my grandma would stand there and sit there and, look out the window. Next thing you know, she'll start, singing a song. I looked at my hands looked new. I looked at my feet. It was like, it was deeply embedded. These songs today that they're singing, a lot of them are not deeply embedded. They're just there because it became commercialized. We're not a people of commercialization. We're a people of culture. We're people of the earth.
Right.
What comes out of the earth are natural products. It's not this commercialism and just let's make up hocus pocus. This is like it's real.
Right.
When I feel the spirit, and all of a sudden here we are. Where is the spirit? And so we're gonna need that spirit to get back into the church. So when that Macedonian call comes out, they can say, truly, here am I, Lord, send me. Because right now, if they ain't making no money, if that plate doesn't runneth over, they don't see the vision of God. It's not in monetary gains; it's in spiritual
That's
gains.
right.
Because one day you could be down, tomorrow you can be up. Because it reminds me of Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs had a liver transplant. After the second liver transplant, he became sick again. He stood up there and told those people, yes, and I was there at the implemental stages of Apple. Yes, I made a lot of money off Apple, but the truth be told, I got a wife and children. I give it all away to live with them. And so we knew that, we never had anything, and all we wanted was life, freedom, place to stay, something to eat, and for a chance to have our family, because many started searching for their families after slavery. And that's why we became very accustomed to family reunions. And that's what we are today. So these churches got to focus on the families.
Yeah, that family reunion. Interesting point.
Yeah.
Never
They
thought
got
of it that way.
because if the church don't focus, we can't have those churches marching like they did across the Edison Pestle Bridge. Those weren't no large mega churches, prosperity ministry churches. There was all these different small churches got together. All these different denominations got together because they knew they were strength in numbers, because it was like a rope. A single strand of a rope is not strong enough, but when you interweave that rope together, it's a strong bond. And that's
Right.
where we at.
A couple points you made, like you saying our people, we're connected to nature, we're connected to spirit.
Right.
And a lot of times we was just my opinion, of course, we was chasing that spirituality from our traditional culture.
Right.
And this brings about Pan-Africanism, and
Yes,
we
yes.
know Pan just means all. and all African from the continent, diaspora all over. In 1900, Sylvester Williams, Henry Sylvester Williams is his name. He held many hats. He was a lawyer, counselor, activist, writer. He organized the first Pan-African Conference, held in Westminster, London, Westminster Town Hall in London, in 1900. And in your estimate, how important was the start of the Pan-African movement, and how important is Pan-African Conference? Start with you, brother. So
Yes, it was very, very important. And I think here again, we got to look at the year 1900, right? Just coming out of chattel slavery here in the United States. Henry Sylvester Williams, basically they faced the same oppression and enslavement in Trinidad. I think it's very important to understand, how we identified ourselves as a people globally in 1900, and that was as Africans, right? Pan-African movement. And, many other, strong figures that was, at that conference, one being a young W.E.B. Du Bois, right, from the United States, right? And then, of course, you had leaders, from the continent, from different African countries, right? And just understanding, the dynamics of imperialism, right, which was basically taking, the land of not only us over in Africa, but, also here in the United States, taking the natives' land, right? I think it's important that, they came together to form a plan, right, to stop colonialism and fight for independence, for all African countries and all Africans all over the world, right? And this was 1900. Here it is 125 years later, and we're still in this same fight. And the thing that strikes me is many of our brothers and sisters has never heard of the word Pan-Africanism or being a Pan-Africanist. I had a conversation, with, someone close to me that a couple of years older than me, like in the 60s, and I asked a simple question, have you ever heard of Pan-Africanism? And they said no, right? So I just think it's important that, we get this information out as far as Pan-Africanism, the goal of Pan-Africanism. And as, we continue through the discussion, we'll see that through the movements and through the teachings of Pan-Africanism, how we've been able to make, progress as a people. So that first Pan-African Conference, really set the stage for later developments, for some of our great leaders, like Marcus Messiah Garvey. And like I say, W.E. Du Bois, he was at the first meeting, and he was at the subsequent meetings, including the fifth Pan-African Conference, which was major. So I just think that having the intelligence, the will, and the courage to stand up against imperialism, to stand up against white supremacy, to stand up against colonization, and to stand up for human rights, for all black people, all African people. I think it's something that, we need to start doing more today. Unfortunately, we think, that we've advanced so much without really, leaning on the wisdom of those who came before us, who fought to make sure that we can have, the few liberties that we have today. Right. So, I just think that first Pan-African Conference is something that, from a historical perspective was very, very, instrumental to, leading up to where we are today in the fight for liberation for all African people.
And it was a young lady from right here from Raleigh that attended the first Pan-African Conference also. Her name escapes me right now.
Anna Julia Cooper. Yes,
Anna Julia Cooper. Right. Your brothers is on point. What does Pan-African unity look like in the 21st century?
I just think that you bringing up Anna Julia Cooper is very, very important because she was a sister, of a black woman, right here from where we're at right now, Raleigh, North Carolina, who was an educator, but understood, the fight. And I think we have to understand not only the fight but the struggle and what it's going to take for true liberation. Now, can you please repeat the question?
So what do you think? Pan-African unity look like in the 21st century?
Well, I'm gonna tell you that's a great question, and I think I got an even better answer. And I think we could turn to Burkina Faso, and we could look at President Ibrahim Traore.
Yeah.
I think we could look at Mali. I think we could look at Niger. It's so many great leaders over there in Africa that I think we all need to take a look at. For one, Julius Malema of South Africa, president of the Economic Freedom Fighters, right? If we tune in and listen, to his message and the work that they're doing, I think that shows what Pan-Africanism is all about. PLO Lumumba, who's a professor, attorney, high level. I feel like, in Africa they're talking about, having, one president, one currency, one central bank, and Africa just being one. A lot of people feel President Ibrahim Traore will make a great choice, and I agree. But I also agree that we have others over there who would be great choices, like PLO Lumumba, like Julius Malema, Dr. Arikana Chiyaboy-Quo, and many others. I don't think that it's so much who it is, but just the fact that we can come together in unison, right? So to me, I think Pan-Africanism, we can look to Africa, but also we can look to what we have to do over here in the diaspora, and I think that, having these type of discussions are very important so that we can understand, the concept and the mission of Pan-Africanism and how it affects not only those on the continent, but those of us who are in the diaspora as well, and how we can contribute to the development of Africa.
Speaking of Abraham Traore, from the Fifth Pan-African Conference in 1945, we had like some major brothers come from out of there, and one of the brothers, Kwame Nkrumah, from out of where's Kwame? From out of Ghana. But he had the same vision as Ibrahim Traore has right now. One government, one people, one currency, all the lights, just a united front. Is this vision, how you see his vision in today's time?
Dr. Sauls?
Can you repeat the question?
Well, Kwame Nkrumah,
Okay, I'm familiar.
out of Ghana, he had him and a few other brothers, but he had the same vision as having a united front of the Africans also. So how do you see his vision, and how does it live in today's time?
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because Ghana has taken the perspective now where Ghana is asking African Americans or Black Americans. It's kind of ironic how we have many different titles, to buy land in Africa, in Ghana, have dual citizenship in Ghana. They've opened up their doors, for tourism, African Americans to come there, and also they, when it came to the cocoa, they used to harvest the plants and send it to France, and France would harvest, then they would take the cocoa and give the final product, and then Ghana had to buy it back, but then Ghana says, no, we're going to take our own plants and we're going to process our own cocoa here in Ghana. So what happened in 1945 has finally come to full fruition in Ghana now, where they're seeking independence. It's interesting that, cause with W.E.B. Du Bois, and also the center that's there for educational perspectives, that they pushing education not only in Ghana but in also the side state of Benin. So that whole area has been a melting pot for the past, I say, 40 years of development, following that, that Pan-African movement, because many leaders were getting assassinated, but they held on to eventually try to build themselves up. So, what happened in 1945 is not in full fruition now, because you have a lot of the countries are saying, hey, look, we can, do it ourselves, especially like with, Captain, Traore, or President Traore, because now they're doing, they're minding their own goal. But in that process, you have to understand that there's also a military aspect of it, where we still are fighting, trying to find out who's the boogeyman in the world. Is it Russia or is it the United States? They're always going back and forth when it comes to that.
Right.
Because one of the major problems I have with the new Pan-Africanism that's coming into full fruition now, you have groups like the Wagner Group, which is the Russian military powers, which are coming into these these countries, these villages, and it's just like now the way the National Guards are going to Washington D.C. They don't live there, A lot of them never been there, and they only see what they on TV. So you have these military groups that come into these countries, that they want to stress their own boundaries and push for Pan Africanism, and basically liberating themselves, not only mentally and spiritually, but also physically and monetarily.
Right.
That you relying on a force to help you to make these things happen. So now we got to come into the thing where when 1945 going forward, you got to remember they just came out of World War II.
That's right.
So all of a sudden, it was an interesting time because now you had Africans who had fought in World War II. They helped the United States and helped Britain, and they helped France, for liberation. Also, they helped Russia at the same time. They fought. And then also we come to this Pan-African movement and say, hey, look, we can do it for ourselves, because we saw how Germany came, rose up, but Germany was taken down, and all these people came together. So if they could come together, how come we can't come together? Because we have to come together, and we fought for these same countries that and I think it was 1889 or 1890, I can't remember exactly the date. They sat back and said, hey, look, we're gonna carve up Africa. And give some parts to France, some to Belgians, and some to England. But now we fighting, to keep them from getting overrun by Germany. So it was an interesting mindset. It's like you fighting to help somebody else get liberated who have not given you your liberation, and that's why all of a sudden you started seeing liberation there in Africa, because a lot of those leaders there fought in World War II, and they said, hey, look, we fought for you. We know what it takes. So why are you now still oppressing us with colonization? That's why Nigeria rose up and said, hey, look, it's time. It is time to give us our independence, because we tired of making money, sending it back to your bank in England. Then we got to petition you with an invoice for you to send the money back to Nigeria. It was flowing one way.
Right.
And it's even worse now when you look at Libya. Libya is inundated with sending free stuff to France, because France's economy was being held up by its profits from the sweet crude oil from Libya. So we got to start looking at, what these other countries have to gain. It propped up their economy. Look at Haiti. Haiti just finished 3 years ago paying France for the liberation,
Right.
and then in the process of getting their liberation, now all of a sudden everybody turns their back. Now Haiti's in totally, totally almost desolate. It's like, open warfare there.
Wow.
Then you have a guy walking around, they call him, barbecue. Because he goes around, if you don't do what he tells you to do, he's going to take care of you. And the gangs are ruling. So they find out when they've already exploited all they can, they got all the money they can, they back away. And now, but with Pan-Africanism, that way we can put together a military force that's made up of all the countries. That when these countries are, can say, hey, look, we need a strike force. They know, they locked and loaded, and they're ready to go. But right now, all these countries are pretty much on their own. If all of a sudden somebody said, hey, look, I'm going across the border and I'm going to do what Russia did to Ukraine, and they cry for help, who's going to help them? If you weaken the United Nations, who's going to help them? So that's one of the importance of the United Nations. You got somebody at least you can appeal to. And so that Pan-Africanism, that was spawned coming out of World War II, knowing where we are and where we need to go as a people, and knowing that you need a military force there in the background. If it's like, if you get a guy get ready to jump on you and he see your big brother standing behind you, he gonna think twice.
Think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what Pan-Africanism is about. All of us coming together, and Omar Gaddafi had it right. Let's get this currency together.
Yeah.
Let's do our thing. And it's sad the way he died. He said, okay, I'll leave Libya. And him and his caravan leaving Libya, and they unleashed the drones on him.
Well,
Come on, man. Well, for what? He was leaving.
Well, there's a lot of, a lot. He
so
started talking a little bit, but
so with Pan-Africanism, that's what we were dealing with. We don't know what's the next, when the next shoe gonna drop.
and I think the Black Panther Party, part of their 10-point system was to have some representation on that United Nations for some, for ourselves. But also you were speaking about, you stressing on the economic independence, the importance of that, and a lot of those countries over in Africa already started taking their steps towards economic independence. But how can we over here start taking steps towards the
It's
economic
hard
independence?
because they're taking their independence, and now they want to sell us their products. But now I ain't trying to throw up no red flags, but now you throw a tariff on their products. So now we less like, if you don't play the game, it could be put up there. We less likely to be able to, we can buy their products but pay a high price for their products. And how we roll. We still trying to stay afloat economically ourselves.
Right. That's what I was asking you to say. Is you see any possible ways for us to start moving for our economic independence? Maybe
Not in America, because
Maybe-
Roland Martin made an interesting point. He says, "Yeah, we have $1 trillion economy, but yet by the time you take in, when we have $1 trillion salaries, we put all our salaries together, and by the time you pay that 30% that goes to the federal government for Social Security, and taxes and things of that nature, then you take that other part that goes towards paying your mortgage, then they take that other part that comes and starts paying for your groceries every day and your car payments and your kids going to school and possibly going to college. That $1 trillion got whittled down. So how much disposable income do we really have to stay afloat? Now we got to really start looking at, they say we could be an independent country with all the money that we make, but you got to remember we got tangible responsibilities that we have to pay stuff we got to pay right, even when it comes to insurance. For sickness. So now we got to figure out, is there a way to, something similar to a 401k or 403b that we can, tell people, hey, look, let's pay it forward. This is what we want to do.
well, yeah.
Economically, I think it's always something that we can do when we realize that, our economic position is used against us, right? I think the fact, as Dr. Sauls was pointing out what Roland Martin was saying, is, kind of to, justify the oppression of the system and the exploitation that comes from capitalism, right? So, I think that we, as, thinking beings, as spiritual beings, we have to raise our consciousness, right, to understand, okay, if economics is being used against us, we have to turn that around and use it for us, right? And one of the principles that Dr. Malana Karenga came up with in Kwanzaa was cooperative economics, right? And I know, we have perfect examples of how we were able to do that here, not only on the continent, but here in the United States. And we spoke on it on this show time and time again, what we was able to develop in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Durham, North Carolina, and other places, right? So we had the consciousness, the knowledge, and the skill to build. And we also have it wherein, even though we have all these expenditures, things that we have to spend money on, we still, when we are operating on a high frequency can consciously start building in our communities and also building bridges with Africa for the development of Africa. Because the stronger Africa is, the stronger we are going to be. The reason why, basically we it seems as if, we are powerless, but we're not all over the planet, is because of colonization and imperialism, right? So we're looked down upon because we have a whole continent that's inhabited, by foreigners who are basically controlling, the government, controlling the resources, and that's why Pan-Africanism came into play to start with, to counter in the fight against imperialism and colonization, right? So economically, we have to think outside of the constructs of Western philosophy and Western psychology of capitalism, right? And we have to really kind of, understand working together more like socialism, where not only the means of production, but the profits, we all receive and we all share, right? Now, in Kemetic spirituality, right, we had Shetawat Netta, the principles. Shetawat meaning hidden, mysteries, secrets, right? Netta means nature, cosmic forces, creator, creation, Shetawat Netta, right? In our 14 principles, it says Shetawat Netta enjoins the sharing of the resources.
Yeah.
So it instructs us to share resources, right? So as a community, when we really understand the wisdom of our ancestors and African values and principles, we start to implement that. That's why one of the main things that we always talk about is the knowledge of self. Yeah. And I think in Pan-Africanism, the knowledge of self has to be the goal and objective. Yesterday, Brother Essence, we had class, with our children, with our students, right? And we spoke about, good speech, how we supposed to speak to one another, right? With respect and honor. But we also taught the children, the main thing we teach is the knowledge of self, based off of Maya, truth, justice, and righteousness. And we taught the children, the first thing to understand in the knowledge of self is that we are African, When we understand that, we're taking a big step because we came over here as Africans and we are still Africans today. The second thing we taught the children that we are black. Don't run from the negative definitions that other people put on black because Kemet is the land of the blacks. Take pride in who you are and don't let nobody make you think otherwise because we are the original people on this planet, right? And the third thing we taught the children is that we are spirit, right? And brother, you even broke it down as far as what spirit is, as far as the attributes of the creator and how we had those same attributes within us. Those type of things are very empowering to children and adults alike when we come into the knowledge of self. So the knowledge of self is a key to Pan-Africanism, and it's a key to liberation. So when we start to think with the African mind and the African psychology, we start to think outside of the realm of, European economics.
Right. And definitely thinking outside of European economics. I think Gaddafi and who was he teaming with? Hussein, maybe another. They was talking about creating their own a new world currency.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, and then we just speaking about the capitalism, and capitalism is built upon racial inequality. So Kwame Ture, he's a relentless in his critique of imperialism, capitalism, and neo-colonialism. And he lifted up socialism as a path for unity. So panel, can y'all share with us some of Kwame Ture philosophy on capitalism and socialism?
Well, I speak on it first because, Kwame Ture is a serious brother. And, I really study a lot of his work. And, he was influenced by, Kwame Nkrumah and many other great Pan-Africanist leaders, Marcus Garvey, and, we can go on and on. But his philosophy, as far as capitalism, was that it was more than anything anti-African and anti-black. And I think that, that's, and I'm not going to, spend a lot of time speaking on it, but I just think that when we understand the reason, that we were brought over here and enslaved as a people and all over the world was for capitalist reasons, right? It fueled the world economy, right? So that in itself, should have us, as African people looking at capitalism and how we have always been capitalized off of, and we're still being capitalized off of, just as the brother just spoke about all of the things that we had to spend money on. It's not by accident, right? It's intentional and it's deliberate to keep us in a social economic position, not only locally, nationally, but also globally. We spoke on that about the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and basically how they work tirelessly to make sure that the African countries are always in debt, right? And that way they can continue to steal the resources from Africa and benefit, economically, off of the oppression, exploitation, imperialism, and also colonization of African people.
It's interesting. We talk about Kwame, Ture. He changed his name in 1969, and then changed his name. He wanted to honor Kwame Nkrumah and Sekou Toure. And in the process of changing his name, it was interesting because I came to NC State in 1975, and in 1974 when I came for a Pan African Festival visiting, because I was interested in university, we used to have what we call a Pan African Festival, and he came in and he spoke. And he was talking about Pan Africanism and where we are headed, as far as pulling together as a people. And I think that's why he moved to Guinea from the country, because he felt the pressure was there, and then seeing that Counter El Pro was doing this thing, you never know. What's going on behind the scenes, and who's going to sell you out for a few pieces of silver or gold or platinum. Even now, who might sell you out for some Bitcoin? Moving forward. That he saw what was happening. The thing is that he pushed it, and plus he was part of SNCC, Southern Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee, which was started at Shaw University.
Yes.
Which is ironic that right here in Wake County we are also a melting pot, for things that to be starting and happening here, and also with some marches that had never been talked about, and also it's ironic we had a point in time where we got to know our history. And so Kwame, when he used to come here to Raleigh and he came to NC State, he used to speak, I just used to think he was just a radical brother. But as you get older, you start seeing, some of these things and say, oh, this is what's happening when the puzzle starts, putting the puzzle together. That's why we got to start teaching our children while they're young, dropping these nuggets of knowledge on them, exposing them. It's called immersion. It's like, like I mentioned before, when it came to this 12 year old Jewish boy getting ready for his bar mitzvah in my class, he was studying Third Reich, in the fall, the fall and rise of the Third Reich. He was studying Mein Kampf. Our kids don't have that rites of passage books in their hand to study. They study in social media, they studying acronyms, OTW, LOL. We got to start infusing in them, some things while they're young. So when they get older, all of a sudden they'll start having what they call those aha moments. Oh, that's what that means. It won't be so hard for them to digest it because they've already been fed it. And so that's where we are with Pan-Africanism. It's going to be hard because what happened is our whole infrastructure that has led us this far, with the music has been dismantled. The churches have been dismantled, and even the educational systems have been dismantled. Because even now, the president of Howard University has stepped down. All of a sudden, the flag comes up. Why did he step down 2 weeks after school started? How come he didn't say next year I'm going to step down? So now we have these infightings. I call the black intellectia at all the HBCUs, and do they really realize that all you're doing is eating your babies because the legacy in which you were founded on is still there, where you are there to be self-serving. And we oftentimes tell students that come to HBCUs, come on to HBCU, we're family. We're gonna take care of you. That may have been once upon a time in America, but now you really look at it. Is the administration really taking care of these kids that are coming there? Are they really taking care of them, or are they there just for a paycheck? Are they? I call them meantime educators. I'm here in the meantime till I find a job somewhere else, or I'm just here in the meantime till I retire. I just want something to do. It's more than something to do today at these HBCUs, because you have children that come there with broken wings. You still have children that come there, first generation, going to college. We're still not out the woods. And now they're just dismantling the Department of Education. So now the HBCUs have to come back and says, okay, it's a spiritual journey. And with that spiritual journey, it's not about us. It's about the seeds that you plant. Because when a person plants a tree, a lot of times, they plant that tree on faith. Because it takes 40 years for a tree to mature. And so that person, if I plant a tree now at my age of 67, I know I'm not going to see those pecans fall off that tree, or those walnuts. But, I'm not going to be there to see it harvested for lumber. But I know I put it there for a reason and purpose.
So that's
It's
in
the
you
right
firsthand.
thing.
You'll be around long enough for it.
40 years, 100 something years old, man.
Nah,
Hey,
you gotta
I
do
take this world one day at a time. So I tell the children, take it one day at a time. Walk by faith, not by sight. So go ahead on, do what you got to do, and just say, I'll be there when the time comes. And that's where with Pan Africans, we've been dismantled. And we've been taught not to care about each other. It's even when it comes to Africans coming here, they look at us and say, "Oh wow, I come here and I got I catch up so fast. I do all this, I do all that." And I'm looking at them and said, "Man, they were colonization last time I checked. They were over there in your backyard taking over. We've been taken across the pond, and now we're here 5 or 6 generations later. 'Cause America's only like 500 years old.
Not too much.
5 or 6 generations later, here I am, and I'm still dealing with epigenetics, which all of a sudden embedded in my DNA may be some of that castration of slavery." And so that's a new thing now, epigenetics.
Yes.
Right.
Where all of a sudden, there may be triggering points in your DNA. You be walking along, all of a sudden somebody say something like a dog whistle, you start jumping, and we never know. Or all of a sudden you start feeling this, this palpitation subconsciously, with something that's happened to your ancestors, but it's come down through your genes. Because they did a study. I don't want to be long with it. They did a study after World War II, where in Sweden, with all of a sudden these children were going through something they could not figure out what was happening. So they went and they looked at World War II, what was happening in Sweden with these children. They were going through starvation. They were going through World War II. And all of a sudden they started picking up on, hey, look, in the mother, with my daughter, my wife's daughter, there's something about that, genetic material passed down from woman to woman, where that woman could have been exposed to trauma. Then all of a sudden she has a daughter that daughter may not get triggered, but her daughter's daughter could get triggered. So now we look at, why all of a sudden, they say, these guys out here acting crazy, doing things, these girls acting crazy, doing things. There could be some things that have happened since, basically, I'm going to tell you, we the heroin age, we went through the heroin age, went through the crack age. Then we went to, really out there, gang banging, NWA. We got all these different sequence of ages that we've gone through that systematically our bodies, our mother's bodies,
Right.
Our sister's bodies, our grandma's bodies been programmed, and we don't know
And
what's going to be. It's like a genetic disease. We don't know what's going to be expressed.
Genetic. Sometimes it might skip a generation.
Yeah, skip a
Jump on-
generation. Because
jump
people
on the
say, man,
grandchild.
he had like his grandfather.
And,
The way he rubs his nose,
Yeah.
the way he pulls his hair.
This United States corporation was built on capitalism that we know for sure. Dr. Kim, you ain't want to share no thoughts on that matter.
No.
Yes.
I
Kwame Ture. Yeah.
it's interesting because now the big thing now is that they pushing like all of a sudden in Virginia and in Maryland they have breeding factories for black people.
Yeah.
They
Word
just,
up.
they put a blindfold on. A male could be messing with his mama. Hey man, let's keep it real. See, everybody want to sugarcoat it and talking about his critical race theory, kick it up on the rug. Man, it's unbelievable. I'm looking at this like, wait, hey, somebody need to pump some brakes. We got to sit down and Pan Africanism. We got to sit down even with Pan, because even one thing about Africa, they have their cultural traditions, where they know what they are. And it was interesting. My daughter, first husband was from his parents were from Nigeria. She stated that they weren't allowed to marry anybody within like almost a 20-mile radius. So they wouldn't be intermarrying of relatives like second and third cousins, things of that nature. And they kept a lineage of understanding. Yeah. We're here in America, we don't know, and we've been through so much. To all of a sudden, you look at what happened in Maryland and Virginia, where they says, okay, slavery entered the United States, but let's keep breeding them. And then when they get out of hand, let's throw the strongest black male over a log and have some fun with them. And now here we are, they telling us we out of control when nobody's holding them accountable for what happened. And they say, oh well, that was my grandfather. Yeah, but nobody corrected it. Mm-hmm. And so now we trying to correct it within the church used to try to correct it, but now the church has been watered down.
Yeah. But the church also became partners with the government in a lot of instances. If we go back to the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, they used churches, Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church, for a post site. So that is where our black men were even gathered to have the experiment done on. The church gathered the people for the government.
Wow.
And so now when you see the COVID virus come, and now churches are participating in administering the vaccinations and testing. So we've, like you said, we've gone through so much trauma. Wake County alone just did they just did a study showing that the poorest zip codes in Wake County, 27610, had the highest infant mortality rate. So we're not even talking about nutrition. Why? Because it's not that our children are suffering from starvation. We know how to get food if we don't do nothing but steal it. Obviously, we're passing something on much more deadly through the bloodstream or epigenetics. We're passing something much more deadly. These chemical imbalances, these not poverty as opposed of having no resources, but just having detriment to our community's mindset. So once you start sending those spirits of rejection and the breakdown of sociology and being able to communicate with each other, we keep forgetting that resources, when we talk about Pan-Africanism economics, we're also talking about our ability to relate to each other.
That's a good point.
And we're also talking about, are we allowed to relate? Brother Sauls mentioned a while ago that we couldn't gather. We couldn't be seen as slaves together because they feared we would be trying to take over. New York actually had a law on Wall Street that says you could not gather 2 or more slaves together. Again, we're talking about 2025, where 2 felons cannot come together. Am I right, Brother
Yeah, and they
sorry.
consider slaves.
So when you get out and you have the label of felon on your record, they would tell our boys, you can't be seen in the car with other felons. You can't be around other. So we're actually under the black codes again. All of those things are passed on. They may change the name, they may change, but the outcomes are the same. What happens when we pass those outcomes to the next generation through our intravenous or through the pipeline of our umbilical cords? We have a whole lot of things, but again, we have to classify what we're going through as a form of warfare.
Yes, it is a form of warfare.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with that.
And we also have to say that those who have us in captivity are mad scientists. The reason why I say mad scientists are sociopaths.
Okay.
If we go back to Germany, we talked about World War I, World War II. They were more interested in who could make the potent to do the gas chamber. What we're talking about, Xylon or many of the chemicals that came from DuPont.
And also Bears from Germany.
Bears from Germany.
Yeah.
Even after the war, once they finished that war and wrapped it up, they went to trial at Nuremberg. The trial at Nuremberg was to hold all Germans accountable for the atrocities that happened in Germany.
And Japan.
And Japan, absolutely. When they start sentencing these people, sometimes by hanging, life, you name it, those who were most important, like your scientists, were given new names by America. America not only tried them, but gave them new names and got them out of prison and brought them here to the United States. And that is how many of them began companies such as Bayer, of which we see located in RTP. We have, these are your connections. So now when we hear a president talking about how he's going to bring the top scientists or the top people from across,
They can immigrate. Yeah.
they can immigrate because we are dispensable, but who he's looking for to be his next top intelligence of society are those from across those waters. So we never change.
Yeah.
It is time for us now to either believe that we are our own resource
Okay.
and that we are worthy of developing ourselves so that we can use each other as a resource. So remember now, we were able to they let us read, they let us write, they let us go to a college, but we were never allowed to build our own communities. They had to, we go to school every year. We graduate every semester.
Yeah.
What does our communities look like as a result? Where are our scientists in our own communities? Where is our industry right now here? The diaspora that you talk about.
Yes.
Where is that? Where can our children find to plug in to all this so-called education that we have that's at a higher level that we can all plug into? And that is the same problem that we see across the globe when it comes to the African diaspora.
Yeah.
Brother Essence,
yes.
if I may, because I really would like to respond to the epigenetics, right?
Yes.
And the trauma that's passed down through the mother, through the child, through the generations, right? Because there is a healing mechanism for the trauma, right? And we often discuss the healing mechanism is the knowledge of self, right? Because we've been through a lot of trauma and we're still going through trauma, right? But when we say in COFA, and we spoke on this last week, when we go back and we learn who we are, our foundation, the things that we were able to do for tens of thousands of years, the brilliance of our ancestors and the brilliance of us, and that this is just a short period of time that we're going through this oppression and exploitation. So when we get the right type of knowledge, the right type of spiritual knowledge, dealing with African psychology, understanding that we are spirit, we start to heal ourselves from that trauma. And what that does, it helps us to prepare what we have to do today, right? For the people on the planet today, but more importantly, how we have to set our future generations up, for liberation and success and world power, right? Because we once had world power as a people, and that has to be the goal, power, right? Because they have us scrambling so much, right? Wherein we get to focusing on, everything that's happened to us. But the most important thing about being a revolutionist is not destroying one system, but building another system. And we start with building our minds and building our spirits with the right knowledge. And that is the way that we counter, epigenetics, because of what it has done to us intentionally and deliberately. So we have to be intentional and deliberate about building our minds up, building our spirits up collectively, globally, as a people, so that then we'll be able to make the progress and gain the power, basically, that we once had on this planet.
Can I also say, Brother Kevin, I think what you're saying is powerful, is that we must build another.
Yes.
It's mandatory. And let me say why. Because many of us, we suffer, and they've often given us trophies for suffering. We have a whole rap industry that's built off of, we'll pay you to suffer and sing about it. To the point, some of them don't want to stop suffering. Matter of fact, the more bullets I put in you, the more I can cash out. So they almost reward you for your suffering. If you think about some of the terminology that they use for us, like words like you're resilient people.
Yeah.
As if we're supposed to endure beatings or abuse or social, psychological, brokenness. It is expedient that we address what it is that is attacking us, because most people won't even think to build anything other.
That's right.
They won't even think that something is wrong. They will almost become conditioned to believe that they're supposed to be in
That's right.
that system. So when you start saying, come over, just start doing something new, they'll be too busy trying to ascertain the lie so you think about the colleges now. How many of the colleges that Trump is threatening are actually saying, well, you know what? If you take this from us, we'll rebuild another, or we'll rebuild another way. They can't think outside of the box. They can only conform.
$100 million a pop.
Right, exactly. You have entire institutions where this man has never been to an institution of education ever, basically, that would have taught him anything, saying we conform and we'll change 3 letters just so that we can get funding. So look how easy it is to break up what you believe is an education system, because education is basically what you believe and what you apply. Is whatever you believe until you come up with something else. So how much does that money dictate what we believe or force to believe?
Yeah.
That's true.
I was on the verge of asking, how do we start to break away from depending on this capitalist system?
First of all, we need to work with the children, because about 5 years ago, I came about this Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, and she talked about adverse childhood experiences and how you can do this scoring, and if you have like 2 or 3 of those, and you're liable to go off. And I prided myself on that. I had full control of my faculties. But I remember there was a couple instances, especially one with my wife. Beat my son one time. I started crying. And I got nervous, and then it dawned on me that by me coming through a domestic violence situation, being the poster boy, my dad come in, he mad at my mom, he jump on me, my mom mad at me, she cussed me out because basically we blame my children too much. What happened with parents, they get together and don't understand what's going on. They start saying, well, if that child wasn't born, I wouldn't be locked into you. If that child wasn't born, I wouldn't have to go to court for child support. It's not the child's fault. And so in my growing up, I started looking at that, and basically I had adverse child experiences, and that really were trigger points. The only thing that saved me was football. That I had those those microaggressions would hit me. I'd be out there in practice. Did you hear the whistle? Nah. I said, nah. I heard the bells. Like ding ding. And so now here we are. Fast forward. I was at an event yesterday, and I'm at one of the housing projects, and it was like these children came, and there was it was for 12-year-old females. this little girl came. She was 7 years old, and the lady was explaining to her, "Hey, look, I would love for you to come, but she's only 7." The girl stood there and started crying because she wanted to be there at the event. So I was looking. I said, "Well, all of a sudden I'm like, I can feel it, and you find that when God starts using, you can feel these little kids' pain." So I said, let's get her a book bag with some the stuff that we have in there, and she can go home at her leisure and look at it. And with kids, it's like show and tell. Look what I got. But eventually let her come in later with her cousin that was 12. And I started looking at it. I said, man, this thing, we got to go to the 4 and 5-year-olds and start at 4 and 5-year-olds and start working with them. By the time, they're 8, 9, and 10 and 12, it's too far gone. We need to let them know that there's a safety net for you. And that's what's happening with us. We need to get that safety net in our community. And what happened with me that, I was radical. I'll be truthful with you. From kindergarten to 10th grade, I got suspended 66 times a year. I'm talking about, I know I did it. Me and my boys did it. Hopper, Harrison, Sauls Beach, and Wait. Us 5, anything happened in middle school, we were on it. That was us. And then now I look back on it, it had to be the grace of God. Because when we really got into some trouble, it was ironic. My sister, texted me and said, "Hey, Derek, be careful. What the statute of limitations are." And I'm like, man, I ain't never murdered nobody, so I ain't worried about that.
But you hit it right on the head, Dr. Saul. You plant that seed early, it'll start resonating soon enough.
Yeah.
And Dr. Kim, I know she said, when you said the bear, they got the bear. What is bear exactly? Like a pharmaceutical
It's
company?
pharmaceutical company.
It's the pharmaceutical company.
They're the
She
ones
said-
who invented heroin.
And she
from
said
opium.
they got a right out there at the RTP, which is the Research Triangle Park, and I also know that the vaccination to the COVID-19 was also created right in the parking lot. The virus itself was created right out there at the hospital in UNC Chapel Hill also. But
Wow.
But the virus been around a long time. It's
well,
just that,
yeah, but we mean the faction that came out.
It really started. See, I
That
studied
came
HIV.
out that came out lately. The new strain of it that was coming out. But
And what-
let's swing. Let me get back to Kwame Ture, because he Kwame Ture boldly spoke about Zionism and the ongoing struggle in Palestine, calling it a land grab supported by British imperialism.
Yes.
Get him, Dr. King.
This has unfortunately played a role in shaping Arab and Jewish relations in the region. It is well known that the United States supports Israel without question. Panel, what are your thoughts on Zionism and the United States' unwavering support for Israel?
Well, I let me weigh in on that because coming from the church world, the hypocrisy, first of all, of what we call the church in their defense of Israel. First of all, America has no business pretending to create a nation for anybody. I mean, especially when they created a stolen nation themselves. So you just can't go around to other people's location and carving out what you believe another should have. This is not your job. That is not your place to do, because you technically don't have a home outside of Europe. That's where you should be. So again, when you come in, and it's only for control factors, because in the same breath while you are fighting Germany against the Jews, you're also trying to create a nation for the Jewish people that today your biggest white supremacists are all Hitler fans. So which one are you? Our police departments are filled with people who are more white supremacists and loyal to the Hitler
neo-Nazis.
neo-Nazism.
The Aryan brothers.
The Aryan brothers. You can't separate them when it feels, and oh so long we've always seen this diabolical platform of white supremacy, that they will camouflage themselves into whatever they need to become in order to maintain the control. And that's what we see, is having a place, having a diplomacy somewhere where they can stick their foot and continue to wage war from wherever. And if that means holding up their own holding up a nation of people to fight the others so that they can have, we saw that down in Cuba. They wanted to make sure that Russia didn't come in is who they align themselves with for a long-term purposes. It's never been about spirituality. It's never been about God and his chosen people. Not when you're looking at the same equate of suffering amongst the African American people, who Hitler said that he took most of his playbook of hate from America. So if you can't save Jews without saving black folk.
Right. Go
They
for
ain't,
it.
we are in your backyard, and you hate us. So again, this is about economics. This is about control. This is about resources. And if I have to use religion to hold on to power, they will do so. If they have to use children, I remember when the Republican Party came out with, abortion rights. And I'm thinking, but you are war criminals wherever you go. You kill and bomb wherever your foot step. You don't ask which babies, who pregnant. You don't tell people the hospitals is off target. Is if it's in the way and we're trying to get to the soil or the oil, it's got to go. And so this is the hypocrisy, because the nation has to have the duality of a narrative that talks about nationality and religion. Those have been the two playbooks since its existence, and until we actually, and that's why the black church is essential in this hour, because it is us who can call out the truth about who America really is.
Right.
Yes. If I can chime in on that, I think it's important because Kwame Ture, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael, he spoke strongly, against Israel and United States backing Israel. The history of why the Jews were granted that land is very interesting. And before I continue, I would just like to say, on the news before we got on this radio show, they was talking about what's going on today in Gaza, right? 50, 60 years after Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture spoke out against Zionism, right? And they was talking about the famine that's going on there now with millions of people who aren't eating, that are dying, that are starving and dying. And over the 50, 60,000 that has been murdered.
That's right.
Right? Because of Zionism. And also the United States, backing Israel, right? Because, when we really, look at it from a geographical standpoint, they call it the Middle East, but there really is no Middle East.
Come on.
It's really North Africa and Northeast Africa.
That's right.
Right? And they built the Suez Canal in order to separate it,
Yes.
right? To create, the land. So here we're dealing with imperialism again, right? Stealing another people's land. So, Kwame Ture was, he was really sharp and, super intelligent. And he always, encouraged everybody to study. Right, and he often, and I think this is important, and Dr. Saul spoke on this earlier, how he would visit the campuses, the universities, to educate the youth, because he always spoke on how it was the youth who sparked revolution, right? But that it would take the masses of the people in order to complete the mission and carry out the mission. And so this takes us back to the 5th Pan-African Conference, right, when they organized so that they can have mass movements, and not only mass movements, but more importantly, mass organization. And, that is what we need today, mass organization. So I think it's important for us, to look at someone like Kwame Ture and see how profound his thoughts and his message was 50, 60 years ago, and how we can relate it to today, what's going on in Gaza with all the injustices by the Israelis and the United States and everybody else who supports that unjust attack on the Palestinian people.
That's good.
Yeah. And you want to?
Well, it's interesting because when they start talking about Zionism, it just didn't pop up out of nowhere. And, I tell people, always read, because the Bible says, study yourself. Read this. Study yourself. Read to study yourself approved unto God. See, the thing is, the Rothschild family need to be understood what they, where they were coming from. Back in the late 1800s, they had already set the blueprint and the template that eventually they were going to create a free Israel. And so it was only a matter of time before it came to full fruition. And what people don't realize that those people that were ostracized by Hitler in the concentration camps, when they left, in mass exodus to go to Israel, they just didn't pack their bags and walk in there.
That's right.
Those people were put in concentration camps and they were vetted before they were allowed to enter into Israel. See, nobody talks about that.
That's
That
right.
they had to sit there in concentration camps waiting just to, to go in and get their interview and look at their lineage and their, family stuff before they were let into Israel. So if you start looking at the Israelis, man, they look just like the Arabs. That's why you look
Yes.
at you look at the IDF. You see them, you're like, well, they look like the guys they fighting against in Gaza. They're cousins.
Yes.
So let's keep it real. So now, it's one of those things. It's a dogfight now to try to figure out is it monetarily? Because if you want another canal to be built over there, similar to the Suez Canal, because you're tired of paying Egypt, where are you going to put it? Right straight through Gaza, and I'm gonna leave that one right there.
Well, I want to add, because I'm glad you mentioned Egypt, and that was really one of Kwame Ture's straightest points, was that was his ancestors' land, right? Because like we say, that's part of North Africa as well. So I think that fighting imperialism is very important, and it's something that we really have to take seriously. Kwame Ture took it seriously. That's why he spoke on not only Zionism but also like we spoke on earlier, the damages that capitalism has created all over the globe.
And Kwame Ture, he also spoke the lectures at universities quite often. Excuse me, in the U.S. and abroad regarding political movements and amongst the young people. He had a great impact. In your opinion, are the youth of today at the university organizing justice and human rights for all with the same energy?
You can't do it today because of what's happening with DEI and the way they sanction all the universities. It's ironic they had the president of Columbia step down, the president of Harvard step
right.
down, and still they had to pay like $200 million, $100 million. And and I think what is happening, when it comes to the mass movements, they got it to a point now where they're striking so much fear in people till they scared that all of a sudden the National Guard is going to show up. Because it was mentioned earlier about Kent State. It was interesting, about Jackson State. It was interesting with Jackson State and massacre and the Kent State massacre were in the same month of May.
That's exactly
in the same
right.
year, 1970. But earlier in 1968, you had the in South Carolina State, you had the massacre there where it was the policemen and highway patrolmen in South Carolina. But in Jackson State and Kent State, it was a National Guard, and we talking about the people died and multiple people were injured. So now it's a situation where nobody wants to get fired on. Nobody wants shooting. And we're at a precarious situation where there's so many guns in the United States now. You don't know who's sitting there waiting for what. And so if you're out there and you're protesting, and a guy comes up with a mask on, say he represent the United States government, to quell the violence and get you back and put you back in where you need to go, you might be reminded of that young boy who shot those people in, I think it was Milwaukee or somewhere. He was like 18. He had an AR-15. He shot those this guy, and he was they exonerated him. And then his mother was supposed to get charged for giving him an AR-15, and all of a
Kyle
sudden,
Rittenhouse.
yeah. So
Okay.
so now all of a sudden you got these then you look at Dylan Roof, in South Carolina, he go kill 9 people at church, and he gets up in North Carolina, getting I ain't gonna say a Happy Meal, but he probably happy to get that Burger King meal and sit in the back of the police car and eat his food. So now we don't know what the dynamics are going to be. Who are these lone wolves, and who's telling these lone wolves what to do? Because they'll plant somebody in there and build them up. So go to that rally and just start shooting and say it was somebody else. Your program.
When you look at the support, I think what we have to start doing is allowing America to make definitions about who they are and what they are doing. If 45, 46 is trying to become 47. And in one breath, he is telling his crowd to basically conquer anything that is in front of them. And they end up killing police officers. They end up killing whomever's in the way on January the 6th, only to be able to deploy the National Guard and give them full reign to do whatever they want. In 4 years, you can go from kill the police too, and 4 years later you can say, but we need the police because they're respectable entities. That's the sociopath. And quite honestly, the communities are so used. We've basically taught ourselves how to condition for change.
Yes.
Because nobody could teach your children that. Nobody could teach your children who first said, I hate black children 4 years ago, and then 4 years later they're saying, oh, I like black children. Do you see the dynamics of this is that they've taught us how to be conditioned for whatever white supremacy does, which means we're basically occupied. We're not citizens, we're occupied. And mentally, there's a cognitive dissonance that's taken place so deep until you can't fight something that you won't even acknowledge as a problem. So, at this point, when we talk about the colleges and universities, they are part of the fabric of the lie. Their textbooks are the problem.
Yes.
Their monies are tied to the lie. Their careers. They're trying to build a career off this lie. So why would I I'm only going to be here 2 to 4 years. Why would I stop what I'm doing to fight against something that I'm supposed to be learning how to weather myself through? And that is what you get. I don't care if it's white institutions at Columbia, Harvard, and Yale, to Howard, St. Augustine Shaw. Nobody is saying, I am bothering this whatsoever. And we're going to coast on through. And that is why we don't have any political power, because everybody's coasting.
Hopefully go away.
Hoping it'll go away.
Wow.
Can I build on that for 1 second?
Yes.
Brother.
Because that was very powerful, Dr. Kim,
Wow,
when you
yeah.
said how we don't even want to acknowledge what the real problem is in dealing with white supremacy.
Come on.
And the real problem is racism. And and I often talk about institutional and systemic racism, and you could say them words, and we now become so used to it, and they now normalize racism to the point that we feel like, okay, so what? It's institutional systemic racism. And we know that it's pointed towards one person and targeting one people,
Come on.
and that's us as black people, African people. So when we don't acknowledge this racism, and we don't acknowledge what Donald Trump represents, which is white supremacy, which is the so-called founding fathers of this country.
Right.
Because for him to be able to have committed 34 felonies and still be the president,
Right.
it shows you the white power dynamics
Absolutely.
of the white man, but in the lengths that they will go through. We complain about it as a people. We talk about it, but what are we going to really do about it?
That's right.
And that's why we had to create power amongst ourselves. Spiritual power, psychological power, using consciousness as power,
Yes.
so that we can build ourselves up, right? Because we sit here, we're talking about how they have taken the out of the churches. They have taken the fight out of the students.
That's right.
Right? By locking them up, firing presidents, trying to make everybody conform, and like Dr. Kim stated last week, comply to the law. Right? So what we have to do is look at the central issue, not only here in the United States, but globally,
That's right.
which is imperialism,
Come on.
which equals white supremacy, and also equals racism. They all work hand in hand in hand. And when we realize that, we'll understand the need for Pan-Africanism and how wise those who came before us understood the global unification of African people was necessary to counter European imperialism.
It's ironic you say that when it comes to imperialism. When the Moors went into Spain, we don't hear any story. They love history. But you don't hear no stories when the Moors were there. They were raping people. They were burning down people. They were hanging people. You know, even when it came to the Inquisition, that was the Catholic Church saying, "Hey, look, we borrowed all this money from the Jews, but now we don't want to pay it back. So what better way not to pay them back than make them convert to Catholicism?" That way, they can't charge us any interest, and we don't have to pay them back. So, when it comes to Inquisition, what was going on, all of a sudden, all these Jewish people had to convert to Catholicism. So now you look at these dynamics, even in Spain, where you have some Jewish traditions are there, even in the Catholic Church there in Spain. But when it comes to the Moors being there, you don't hear about all that rape, pillaging, and burning and killing. Because, they would highlight that. This is what happens when they come into your country. But you don't see that. You hear about the architecture. You hear about the Arabic, the math and the sciences and the great things they left, and then they left, and they went back to Africa.
Just when they civilized for 700 years.
Yeah, so
get out of there.
So now it's interesting, but you think about it. Even during World War II, Spain had its own little civil war, but they never had the major destruction that France. France was spared because of Hitler wanted to use them as my poster child, but Germany was leveled to the ground. England was leveled to the ground. Russia was leveled to the ground. Ukraine, where the Ukrainians are, all in that area, all those areas were leveled to the ground. And here we are, 70 years later, looking at 70-something plus years later, looking at a not really the original, architecture and stuff, because everything was done. This is all new. But yet they had people there that had thousands of years of history. The United States only has 5 years of history. So now we got to figure out what we're going to look like 4,500 years from now.
And Dr. Sauls, you was mentioning just a little while ago about South Carolina State, Kent State, Jackson State, the massacres out there. I want to read the dates and a little bit of what happened. So on the 8th day of February in 1968, Orangeburg, South Carolina, which holds South Carolina State, state troopers and police shot into a crowd of African American activists, killing 3 and wounding 28 more. On May 4th, 1970, on the campus of Kent State, the National Guard opened fire on student protesters of the Vietnam War, killing 4 and wounding 9 more unarmed students. And 11 years later on the campus of Jackson State, what was it, 10, 11? Where I'm at.
I think it's May 19th or something like that.
Right, 11 days later, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Right, 11 days later on the campus of Jackson State University, local police confronted and attacked students, killing 2 and injuring 12 more. And with that being said, how can today's youth be better equipped with knowledge, tools, and protection?
But they can't really. It's interesting because we had the Wilmington 10, which was very prevalent in the 70s with Reverend Ben Shavers, where they were there talking about integrating a facility where when it came to South Carolina State, they were talking about integrating the bowling alley. And then what's that basketball player? And he was in Norfolk, Virginia, Newport area. He played for Philadelphia. It slips my mind. He's a basketball player. He got in trouble. He did the crossover dribble. Ivan Allison. Allen Iverson. Colleges wouldn't touch him. Because they said he was out there leading the protests, which he was out there, and they were protesting. But he got in trouble, and that's why Georgetown, picked him up. John Thompson said, "Look, come on, you're mine, you're my child. I'm gonna take care of you."
Right.
Because everybody else dropped him like a hot potato.
Oh, that's
and that's the other thing you gotta start thinking about these students, man. With artificial intelligence, internet, everything has a fingerprint. That's why they tell you, if you plan on working for the CIA, Secret Service, and all the other organizations, you better watch your social media. You better watch your Facebook. And I didn't really think about Facebook being that way until there was a Virginia Episcopal school up in Virginia, got a young man up there on a scholarship to go to a private school there. And he's from Raleigh, and all of a sudden he posts on Raleigh, him and his friends hanging out, one of them had a gun. The school saw it on Facebook, says, "I don't think you're the type of person we need here." But his family was well known here in Raleigh. He wasn't that kind of kid, but it was the company you keep. And that's where we are now, even with the company you keep. So now, even though you're protesting, doing what's right, they'll say, we like dolphins and tuna, everybody going into the net. And so that's where it is now. People are scared to protest. They're scared to say certain things because they know that AI is going to pick it up. Even with Elon Musk going there with Doge, talking about they were going in here getting all this information. all they doing was setting up the transfer of information and buzzwords. That when something happened, there's a repository. There's a repository because you think about it. If you go and you order a pair of sneakers and you go on Facebook, all of a sudden all these advertisements
That's
for
true.
sneakers are popping up. You say, I ain't want no sneakers through Facebook. Why are they up here? Algorithms.
That's
Yeah.
right,
They
brother.
got us, man.
That's
Yeah.
right.
That's
You know,
right.
that's why I try to stay off the grid as much as possible. They know everything you're doing.
That's true.
Even they found out there were certain TVs. You sitting there talking about, yeah, I got cable, man. But you know, in that cable, there was a camera in that TV watching you.
Yeah.
You know, so we you know, it's like, how do you protest?
Well,
That's the question. How do you protest?
Well, I think that, the government is deterring student protests, and students basically using their mind and their intelligence to fight for social justice and human rights, and that's what education is supposed to be about. The upliftment of humanity. So,
That's right.
I think that we really need to challenge the government and its policies and laws to put protection on our students, because our students shouldn't go off for what's considered to be higher education and be murdered because they're having a nonviolent protest.
That's true.
And they standing up for themselves and what they believe, because we should teach all of our youth to stand up for truth, justice, and righteousness,
Right.
right, and what they believe. So I think protection has to be put on the children, because even though it might not look like it was a lot of success coming through the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement, but we have to admit that we have made progress in terms of the consciousness of the community of what we'll go for and what we won't go for. And I'm gonna give an example of that. I was studying the brother Kwame Ture, and he said that it was posed to him how we weren't really making any progress as far as amongst the youth as compared to when Kwame Ture was coming through in the 60s. And he said he didn't agree with that. He said try to make a black child or African American child go to the back of the bus and watch how they respond, right? Because it's a different type of consciousness, right? Wherein now you can't really make us do anything, but what we have to do is turn that consciousness into being conscious of being conscious, and being conscious of the right knowledge and the right information, and understanding that the reason why the youth is like that today is because of what brothers like Kwame Ture, the Black Panther Party, Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and many others, how they stood up and fought, for the liberation, freedom, justice, and equality for black people. So now it's going to take a concentrated effort of all of us, to work in our communities and work with our youth. Brother like me and you do, Brother Essence. Like Dr. Saul said, start getting them when they're young, 4 and 5. That's what we do at KCSSU.
Yeah.
We take children 5 years old, and we take them at 4 if they got a sibling or two that's in the program, right? And it's important, and me and Brother Essence, we had this conversation yesterday, because we're not only concerned with the children in our organization, we're concerned with all black children all over the world. So we feel like we need thousands and thousands of organizations like KCSSU that teach the knowledge of self, right? But before we start teaching the knowledge of self, we have to have the knowledge of self. So it's harder when it comes to adults, right? Because children, they have an open mind when it comes to learning. But with adults, a lot of times we feel like, we've already went through the educational process and we're not trying to learn anything else. But if you don't have the knowledge of self or who you are as a person, your origin, your culture, your original way of doing things, and then basically you're going to be lost. And then you're going to have a false consciousness. You're going to take on the consciousness of Western philosophy and Western psychology. So it's important that we have as many organizations as possible that's going to teach our children who they are. We are African people. The knowledge of self. Teach them on our great history, but more importantly, teach on what we have to do today to build in our communities locally, nationally, and globally.
It's interesting you mentioned about children. Now we have to look at the question, are our brothers and sisters really having children? Because when I was coming along, my generation was the first ones that were able to go to the predominantly white institutions, get these good jobs, and all we started buying into this capitalistic system about, these are all the things we need.
Right.
Now, I look at a lot of my classmates, some of them, were dinks, double income, no kids. Some of them, didn't get married, didn't have any children. If you really look at it, right now, we're looking at maybe the African American population of our states being about maybe 12%. But you got to remember, a lot of them are comprised of the baby boomers. So in the next 5 years, we're going to be down to about 8 to 9% because, a lot of, black people aren't having children because, they didn't have, my classmates didn't have children. Their children didn't have children. If they did, they had one. And that's one of the, you really start looking at the fine tuning of how the signal went off when it comes to children is when you had the fentanyl epidemic. A lot of these, white, families only had one child, and then that one child would die from fentanyl overdose, and that's when they galvanized against the fentanyl, situation, and all because it spawned out of the opioids. They get injuries, and they get hooked in the opioids, and they get caught up in that. So then when those white parents started protesting, I sat back and said, why are they protesting so hard? Come to find out, look at the interviews, they only had one child. Their family was over. And so now we find out, it's called, preservation. When they went against Roe versus Wade and says, okay, now, no more abortions. It wasn't about us. It was about them having more children because that's, your legacy. That's why, at the end of the like my age now, all that I've earned, it ain't about me because I'm in the short rows. It's about what have I left for my, the legacy for the generation after me.
Absolutely.
Then all of a sudden you sit back and look, there's no generation after you. All of a sudden now, Black America, where we used to take care of our elderly, now there's nobody in the families to take care of the elderly because they no longer have large families. So then you start talking about going off to college, there's no, you go to college now, you sit there, but before you had families, aunts and uncles. That's one thing I love about HBCUs. Everybody come there. It's a great big party when you walk across that stage. But now, all of a sudden you see one or two people. Last, graduation, I'm going to meet parents. I said, where the rest of your family? Oh, my mom was the only one that could come. So we're looking at all of a sudden, we marginalize our own culture and our ethics of what we believe in because that village, all of a sudden, you go look in that village and those huts are empty. And so now we're looking around to try to figure out, where do we go from here? And I'm telling you, where we go from here is to realize that we are a village. And even though that my neighbor's child is not my child, if I see them out there hungry, then if I'm with my family eating, they're gonna eat. Cause I'm telling you, I grew up very selfish. I played basketball all day. I'm gonna use this analogy, I'm gonna stop. It's not a real analogy, it's the truth. So I'm out there playing basketball all day with my friends, about 6 or 7 of us, man. The ice cream truck come up. My dad, back the ice cream like 5-10 cents. My dad give me $1. I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna be first in line, get my ice cream, then I'm gonna double back and get another one. My dad, I went over and my dad says, hey, take your friends with me. I'm like, they on their own. I'm thinking in my mind, they on their own. Dad, you gave this to me. He said, no, how do you play ball with them all day and they're your friends? And then the ice cream trunk come up here and you got money and you're going to eat ice cream in front of them.
Right.
And then it started making sense. We talk about, germs and diseases. We buy Coca-Cola, everybody get a swallow.
That's exactly right.
Buy a honey bun, everybody get a bite on the honey bun.
Right.
Ain't nobody, worry about, getting sick. It's unbelievable, man.
Right.
It's crazy. Here we are fast forward and we become our children, even parents have become very selfish.
It's true.
Oh, who are they to have that? Who are they? But you don't know the problems they have with maintaining that.
But I think the root of that is capitalism again attached to racism. And if you're always in the rat race, then you don't get a chance to see another's face. You just see what's in front of you.
Right.
Which is, what do I need? What can I have? What can I do? I knew we were in trouble when you start going to churches. And the church lingo was turn to your neighbor and say, neighbor, I am something, something, something. It was never, how can I help you?
Right.
The language was never for us to come together. The language was never for us to build together. It was, I'm going to go up. I'm going to get mine. You sounded like a rapper. We didn't know if you was in the streets or in the church because the spirit was the same. So, yeah. And so, again, it was always, reach up and get your blessing. Get up, it was never about how you could help somebody else. And then, again, until we, so they start pimping us out. That's you
Pimping
got
in the pulpit.
Pimping in the pulpit. So, you know, get in line. If you hear the Lord saying something to you now, go now. Why? Because you're trying to get God to give you something like He was a genie in a bottle. You was never getting in line for somebody else. You was getting in a line for you to get yourself a fix. You know, and the American money system and the capitalism was always surrounded with you could never have enough, and you were never going to be content. And so how can I come up? It was never a content time in your life. So if you are preaching that, and God, I thought was meant rest, and some kind of tranquility, and set your affections upon things that are above and not things that corrupt. I think that's what they used in the Bible. So how did you go from trying to compare yourself to other people with the things that you have to supposedly trying to get the most tranquil things in life or the peaceful? So, this was American religion and ideology. Again, when they came to this land, they were looking for gold, God, and control. I don't care what nobody say. All of that was together. They used God to control, and they used guns if they couldn't use God. So whichever came first is how they. If you didn't obey with God, we're gonna pull out these guns, and that is how the control stayed in control. We got to understand. Then they monetize, and they legalize and weaponize their systems.
Yes.
And so we're just pretty much either asking how can we be a part so we can survive, because what they're teaching does not teach us how to disconnect.
Wow.
That's deep right there. Yeah, that was beautifully said.
That's what Pan-Africanism
That's
teaches.
Pan-Africanism
Yes.
right there. Yeah,
Come
that
on,
is.
how to
So-
disconnect.
And until then, disconnect. But until then, well, let me go here. We had a lot of small victories, from FAS, civil rights, Black Panthers. We had a lot of small victories, but it's a lot of unfinished business. I'm trying to figure out how I want to ask the question. What unfinished business do we think is most urgent for the generation to pick up on right now?
Mental health.
Elaborate.
Well, because in I think it was December 2019, the News and Observer came out with an interesting article where it says it's noticed a trend in high schools where the suicide rate had increased amongst African American students, and it was getting out of control. So I sat down with a psychiatrist named Mr. Bertie Warren, and him and we sat down. We always chop it up about what's going on. Even with Man Interrupted, talking about the young males and what's going on with them as far as trying to define who their manhood are. Because we're in a situation where it's disastrous, and we try to figure out how do we climb out of this and keep our sanity, because we all have families and we want our families to be around others who are stable. So we just can't be self-serving and say, well, my family's okay, I'm not going to worry about yours. So in talking, with him, we wrote a grant where we're looking at wellness action recovery plan called WARP, where it means those who've had suffered of mental health issues, they will now we recruit them to teach the curriculum to work with others, because all of a sudden you had those adverse childhood experiences, and then you have people that are right there on the edge, and then the police get called in with somebody all of a sudden had a mental health episode, and nobody was called in from WARP to talk that person off the ledge. So that officer goes in there and starts shooting them down. That's why Raleigh Police Department now has a wellness action recovery plan in place, that when it comes to somebody suicidal and mental health issues, they bring the counselor in and try to have the counselor talk them off the ledge first, rather than going there with guns blazing, those types of things. So with our kids, I'm sitting back looking at it, and it bothers me even with my grandkids. My daughter told my grandson, "No, I'm not taking you to the mall today." First thing he says, "I might as well be dead." Man, when I would come along, if I said I might as well be dead, my dad and mom would say, "You're gonna get close to it before I stop." And I'm looking at him, and I'm like, "What are you saying?" He said, "This is true, man. I got to sit right here." I said, "Get you a book, read." I said, "This is temporary." So now you got black parents scared to sit back and tell their children sit down. They, they patronize
It's
them.
true.
They're like,
It's
oh,
true.
let me order some DoorDash for you. Some
It's true.
Uber Eats.
They pity them.
Yeah, let me go. Let me go on Amazon. So when I try to tell my daughter, what are you doing? She talking about, Dad, you stay out of this. You don't understand. But then when they crash out, they have those mental episodes, and these kids now cussing at their parents.
It's true.
Back in the day, you used to be in the store and see the little white kids look at their parents and say, you need to go off and leave me alone. And I'd be like, man, the black families don't have that problem. Yeah, we let the beast come in the door. And so now we have these problems, these kids cussing parents out. And parents looking at them and accepting it. You don't have to accept that.
Right.
Because you're going to find out in the twilight, when you get older, you're going to be sitting there and you be like, how come they don't love me? Where they at? They're going to look at you and say, because I knew all these troubles. And you knew I was going to come through all these troubles and have all these hurdles down the road. But you let me crash out.
Right.
You didn't put those parameters in there. That's one thing about the black community. We put parameters out there. Say, hey, look, little Johnny, he could go out there and explore all the world. Little white boys explore all the world. If there's a snake on the path, he walk down there just to see if he can outmaneuver that snake from biting him. But with us, we see that snake and I ain't going that way. I'm going the other way. And then our parents will tell you, hey, look, sundown time. When you see the street lights start coming on, getting dark, come on home, baby. I want to know you safe and inside. We knew what security was. Parents aren't making sure their kids are secure. They did just push them up. So when they're 18, they're on their own. Then all of a sudden, you don't really have a child. You have a broken. I forget who it says it's easier to mold, young black men and to deal with broken. Children.
Frederick Douglass.
Yeah, the grown. It's easier to mold, children than to deal with broken men.
It's true.
Our children, this generation's broken. Suicide's on a rampage. And then they started, talk about, the black church never addressed that. We've always addressed that. We had our own way that, if a pastor saw with somebody, had mental health issues, and, if it's a female, there's an older lady in the church living by herself, you say, can you watch her, give us a place to stay? We always let other people, we bring people in. Now we push them out.
But we also allow society to dictate to us what mental health is.
There we go.
I can't tell you how honored, sadly to say, as a black woman who had birthed 4 children, who their children were sold before them on a slab of concrete, never to see them again, and was expected to report back to duty
True.
in 24 hours. When the sun came up, you were supposed to be back on the plantation. No, you're not going to get a leave of absence because your children were stolen. No, you were not going to take a woman's day break of mental health. These are things that we have had to endure as a people, unrightfully so. However, now the white woman cannot take any kind of affliction, mental, physical. Their standard says that, and the attorney that I work with calls this incidental benefits. It means that we're going to give you these benefits because you cry for them. And if they just so happen to fall down or roll down into others' people's parameter of life, that is how we get those same benefits. But we could have never gotten an allowance to take a leave off because of a mental health break.
FMLA and none of that stuff.
FMLA,
None of that
any
stuff.
of those things. We've been taught to endure those things, and we've been given the word resilience as a badge of honor. Again, what they consider mental health, if they had to go through what we had to go through, they wouldn't have never made it. And so, again, we have to start defining. It is, as a matter of fact, like you said, Brother Sauls, where is the accommodations for all of the generational trauma, Ace, that have come down? No one has said there should be some form of compensation or a study done on anything that because they've, Ruth Dillon, the one who killed the 9 people, immediately after white children killed, the first thing that the system says is that we got to find out if he has a mental health
Disorder, yeah.
mental health disorder. Little Johnny and them can kill people in the neighborhood, and mental health never comes up in the conversation. But that is how we are viewed, is that we are brute, and brute people should not be given any kind of considerations.
Right. I like to add on that mental health. Right.
Yes, sir.
I like to add on it from a African centered orientation. Right. Because mental health is exactly what it's supposed to be, a healthy mind.
That's good.
Right. Mental health. Now, when we talk about mental illnesses and mental disease, we got to look at the root causes of these illnesses and diseases. Right? We can't just look at the child who's suffering from a mental illness or disease, but let's look at the root cause,
That's right.
the causation. Let's look at the environment that they're growing up, right? The planned poverty in our communities, the planned depression, the miseducation.
That's right.
Using a European curriculum, something that, is hard for a black child to adapt to unless they adapt to it, right? Which gives them a false consciousness, right? And, I think that when we really, and I had spoke on this earlier, as far as the knowledge of self as being a healing mechanism, right? Because the reason why we suffer from mental illnesses and mental diseases is because we've been hit in the head 1,000 times with a baseball bat.
That's true.
Well, we don't even have any type of knowledge whatsoever of who we are as a people.
It's true.
And a lot of times, how we even got here, right? And what led up to us getting here, right?
true.
So history is very important, right? The more we dig into our history, the more we discover. The more we find out. The more we find out the knowledge of self or who we are, right? Because it's like, Sun Tzu said, right? Know three things, right? Know thyself, know thy enemy, and know the terrain.
Art
Right?
of war.
No, that's right. Know the ground. And this is a global ground that we're dealing with when we're talking about imperialism, right? And when we're talking about white supremacy and racism, which is the root cause of a lot of our problems. But yet we want to look at that black child and act like why he's acting out.
That's right.
Go back through history and you'll see how we got to where we are today, right? And that's why what we teach at KCSSU is so important. Because a child will listen when they're young, and it's like Dr. Sauls was saying, what Frederick Douglass said, it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And that's true. That's why we got to start when they're young and give them the right knowledge. Because when you have the right knowledge, what that does is it cuts down on the chance of you having mental illnesses and mental diseases.
Right.
Because you have properly prepared yourself for this world and the challenges of this world as a black child, whether it's a black boy or girl, a black woman or a black man. And the thing we have to realize more than anything is, even though, okay, our numbers may be low over here in North America, 40-something million or whatever, but we got 1.4 billion brothers and sisters on the continent.
Come on.
And that's something to really think about. And through the diaspora, when you add the diaspora, United States, and the continent, it's probably close to 2 billion of us.
That's true.
Which is almost 25% of the population on the planet, which is a good percentage, right? So I think that the healing process is very important. And I spoke on this earlier, saying code for going back, understanding what our ancestors laid down, even our recent ancestors, Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and all our other greats, right? Applying that knowledge and also being creative and innovative in our thoughts, challenging ourselves, challenging our children, right, to fight for liberation. Let them understand really what revolution is and the need for revolution, which is a changing of the mind and a change in the way changing the way that we do things as a people. So we have to be revolutionary in our approach, and we cannot depend on this system to fix our problems. If we depend on the system to fix our problems, we're going to be having the same conversation 100 years from now, just like we was having 100 years earlier with the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois, and many others of our great leaders.
And the Harlem Renaissance.
And let me ask you something, too. I always like to put a question on the table. This notion that we can all kumbaya. I think sometimes we confuse liberation by advancing but then we digress because someone tells us that
Right.
we're supposed to all kumbaya together. I remember how powerful the Montgomery, Alabama boycotts were when we all carpool. We came off of those buses and we found a way to fleet. And as soon as they let us sit in the front row, we lost that momentum of wanting to use our own transportation and right. So we often start with the notion that yes, we should build our own communities and our own resources, and then we get tricked into if we're not with them, then we're not.
Yeah, their water tastes better.
Right.
And I deal with that now because I live in a predominantly white community, and I said, if who nobody comes to visit me. Where if I stay in the black community, I'll be around my people. That's why I hang out in Southeast Raleigh. We're always working with the youth and things of that nature because I try to stay close.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, every time I get with you
Now,
all,
what's-
it's
pardon.
no. I mean, it's extremely fun. I learn so much every time I get with you all. Y'all don't know how much knowledge y'all shared on me, if no one else. But
You do an amazing job, Brother Essence.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I wanna before we do close up, I wanna get because we've seen the struggles of the past is not over. They only shifting forms from Jim Crow to mass incarceration, from from denial of education to miseducation. The names change, the laws shift, but the intent remain the same. I want to ask real quick if I can get some answers from the panel. What is our duty, our mission as people moving forward? The question I'm asking is where we go from here.
The youth. Working with the youth, and that's what I'm doing. Tooth and nail every day. I think about it, and I teach over at Shaw University. And anybody in my classroom, I tell them when they come in there, I work for you, because if you weren't in those seats, I would not have a job. So I have an obligation to make sure I give you the best advantage you have to go out there and get two things: either get a job or go to graduate school. And that's what we should also, education's being downplayed. Oh, you don't need no college degree. You don't need that. College does not teach you how to do a job. What it does is it connects you with a network of people that you can rely on and you can reach out and touch. Because we're all 6 degrees of separation. But if you get rid of that 6 degrees and you right there at the crossroads with somebody, that's what it's all about. Being at the crossroads and meet other people. Where if you weren't there, you just went to a community college, that's all you have is still your community. But we're a global world now.
I would say teach the truth. Teach the truth, declare it, speak it wherever you are. Yes, to our children so that they can have a head start. But we also have many who are adult children who are mentally incarcerated behind the walls of indifference and the walls of capitalism, who have been just enslaved. And so we have to speak the truth and speak truth to power.
I would say where we go from here, we go where we came from, Africa. Like, I think that, an example that I want to use, if you ask a European, what is better for him, European philosophy or European psychology or African philosophy and African psychology? And I guarantee he'll say European. You ask a black person, is it better for us to have African philosophy and African psychology or European philosophy and European psychology? And a lot of times we'll probably get stuck because we don't really understand our philosophies or our psychologies because of the European curriculum that we're taught here. So I'm not blaming us. Basically what I'm saying is our position should be to get an African-centered orientation and understand who we are as a people with the knowledge of self.
Sound like the 3 main points of moving forward. It'd be us right now. To my co-host, Brother Asar, I'd like to say thank you. To Dr. Kimberly Mutarian and Dr. Sauls, thank you for standing in truth with us tonight. And to you, our listening family, remember the answers we seek are already within our history, our
Yes.
unity, and most importantly, within ourselves. Until next time, know thyself, love your people, and walk in Black Power. This is Africans United, Know Thyself Black Power Radio, where Black consciousness is not just talked about, it's lived. Remember, proper education always corrects error. Peace.
Ooh.